What started as a harmless shopping trip ended in screams, panic, and death. This true 1945 mall story was so horrifying, many witnesses never spoke about it again. I never believed in ghosts or curses until that winter afternoon in 1945. What was supposed to be a simple shopping trip with my sister Margaret turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. One that still haunts me 70 years later. Even now, as I write this with trembling hands, I can feel the cold dread creeping up my spine, just as it did that December day at Riverside Plaza. It was December 15th, 1945. The war had finally ended, and America was celebrating. The streets of Chicago were alive with a festive energy that hadn't been felt in years. Soldiers were home, rationing was ending, and people were eager to spend money on luxuries they'd been denied for so long. Margaret, my younger sister, had been begging me for weeks to take her shopping at the newly renovated Riverside Plaza, one of the first modern shopping centers in the city. "Come on, Dorothy," she pleaded over breakfast that Saturday morning. "They have everything there now, a department store, a drugstore, even a lunch counter. We could make a whole day of it." I was 23, Margaret just 19. Our parents had passed away during the war. Dad from a heart attack when he heard my brother Jimmy was killed at Normandy, and mother from pneumonia 6 months later. It was just the two of us now, living in our family's modest brownstone on the south side. I worked as a secretary at a law firm, and Margaret was training to be a nurse. We didn't have much, but we had each other. "All right," I finally agreed, watching her face light up. "But we're sticking to a budget. I mean it, Maggie." She threw her arms around me. "I promise. Oh, Dorothy, you're the best sister in the whole world. If only I had listened to the unease I felt that morning. If only I had suggested we go somewhere else, anywhere else. But hindsight is a cruel teacher. We took the streetcar to Riverside Plaza around 11 o'clock. The building was impressive. 5 stories of gleaming white limestone with enormous display windows showcasing the latest fashions, appliances, and Christmas decorations. The plaza had been partially damaged by a fire in 1943, and the renovation had taken 2 years to complete. It had only reopened 3 weeks earlier, and everyone in Chicago was talking about it. The main entrance was crowded with shoppers bundled in their winter coats, breath misting in the cold December air. A doorman in a smart burgundy uniform tipped his hat as we entered, and we stepped into what felt like another world. The interior was magnificent. Polished marble floors reflected the light from massive crystal chandeliers. A grand staircase with brass railings curved up to the second floor, and the air smelled of perfume, coffee, and new merchandise. Christmas garlands draped every railing, and a towering Christmas tree stood in the center of the main hall, decorated with hundreds of twinkling lights. "It's beautiful," Margaret breathed, squeezing my arm. We started on the first floor, browsing through the cosmetics and jewelry departments. Margaret tried on lipstick samples, while I admired a string of pearls I couldn't afford. Everything seemed normal, pleasant even. But as we moved through the store, I began to notice small things that struck me as odd. The temperature seemed to fluctuate wildly. One moment I'd be comfortable, the next I'd be shivering as if someone had opened a window to the winter air. I mentioned it to Margaret, but she just shrugged. "Old building, bad heating," she said. They probably haven't worked out all the kinks from the renovation yet. I also noticed that certain areas of the store seemed to be avoided by other shoppers. Near the back of the first floor, where they kept the linens and household goods, the crowds thinned considerably. A saleswoman stood alone behind a counter, her expression blank, staring at nothing in particular. When I caught her eye and smiled, she didn't react at all. "That's odd," I murmured. "What is?" Margaret was already heading toward the stairs. "Nothing," I said, pushing down the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. "Let's check out the second floor." The second floor housed women's fashions, and Margaret was in heaven. We spent nearly an hour looking at dresses, suits, and accessories. She found a lovely navy blue dress with white collar and cuffs that was on sale, and I encouraged her to buy it. "You look wonderful in it," I told her, "and you deserve something nice after all those long shifts at the hospital." While she went to try it on, I wandered over to a display of gloves near the back of the department. That's when I saw the elevator for the first time. It was an older model, with an ornate brass gate instead of modern doors. The gate was decorated with an intricate pattern of vines and flowers, tarnished with age. There was something about it that drew my attention, and not in a pleasant way. The elevator shaft seemed darker than it should be, and when I looked at it, I felt an inexplicable wave of dread. A hand touched my shoulder, and I jumped. "Sorry, it was just Margaret, laughing at my reaction. Didn't mean to startle you. What are you looking at?" "That elevator," I said. "It's strange. Everything else in this place is brand new or recently renovated, but that looks like it's from the original building." Margaret glanced at it and frowned. "Maybe they couldn't replace it because of the war. Materials were scarce, remember?" "Maybe," I said, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with it. We had lunch at the counter on the third floor, where they served sandwiches and milkshakes. Margaret chattered happily about her new dress and about a doctor at the hospital who had asked her to the Christmas dance. I tried to focus on her words to enjoy this normal moment with my sister, but I kept thinking about that elevator. "You're distracted," Margaret said, poking at my arm with a straw. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I lied. "Just tired, I guess. We've been walking around for hours." "One more floor," she pleaded. "Please?" "They have books and records on the fourth floor. I want to see if they have that Glenn Miller album I've been wanting." I agreed, and we headed for the stairs. But Margaret stopped me. "Let's take the elevator," she said, pointing to the brass-gated one I'd been staring at earlier. "My feet are killing me." "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" I don't like old elevators. They make me nervous. Let's take the stairs." "Don't be silly," Margaret said, already walking toward it. "It's perfectly safe, or they wouldn't let people use it." I should have insisted. I should have grabbed her arm and dragged her to the stairs, but I didn't want to seem hysterical, didn't want to ruin her good mood over a vague feeling. So I followed her to the elevator, my heart pounding harder with each step. The elevator operator was a young man, probably no more than 17, wearing a burgundy uniform that matched the doorman's. But while the doorman had been cheerful and warm, this boy's expression was blank, his skin pale and waxy under the fluorescent lights. "Floor?" he asked in a monotone voice. "Fourth, please," Margaret said brightly. He pulled the brass gate closed with a metallic screech that made my teeth ache. The elevator lurched upward, and I grabbed the handrail. The cables groaned as we ascended, and the lights flickered once, twice. "These old things," Margaret laughed nervously, and I could tell she was starting to feel uneasy too. We had just passed the third floor when the elevator suddenly stopped. The lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. "Oh," Margaret gasped, grabbing my arm. "It's—" "All right," I said, trying to sound calm even though my heart was racing. "Just a mechanical problem. It'll start up again in a moment." We waited. 5 seconds, 10, 20. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. "Excuse me," I called to the operator. "What's happening?" No response. "Hello?" Margaret's voice was shaking now. "Can you fix it?" Still nothing. I fumbled in my purse for the small flashlight I always carried, a habit from the war years, when blackouts were common. My fingers finally closed around it, and I switched it on, swinging the beam toward the front of the elevator, where the operator had been standing. The space was empty. "Where did he go?" Margaret whispered. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely audible. My hands were shaking so badly that the flashlight beam danced erratically across the walls. "He was just here. He was right there." The temperature had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath, now white clouds in the flashlight beam. Margaret pressed against me, and I could feel her trembling. Or maybe that was me. "Dorothy," she said, and there was pure terror in her voice. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing and the creak of the elevator cables. But then, faintly, I heard it, a scraping sound like fingernails on metal coming from above us. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was methodical, deliberate. Something was on top of the elevator. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice cracking. I shone the flashlight on the brass gate and tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. "Help me." Margaret grabbed the gate with me, and we pulled with all our strength. It didn't move even an inch. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, and then we heard the voice. "Going down," it said, a hollow mockery of the operator's earlier monotone. But it wasn't coming from inside the elevator with us. It was coming from above, from the darkness of the shaft. The elevator suddenly dropped. We screamed as we plummeted downward, the cable shrieking in protest. My stomach lurched into my throat, and Margaret's fingernails dug into my arm hard enough to draw blood. We fell past the third floor, past the second. I was certain we were going to die, that the elevator would crash into the basement and we'd be crushed. But just as suddenly as it had started falling, the elevator stopped. The jolt threw us to the floor, and my flashlight skittered across the metal floor, its beam spinning crazily before coming to rest, pointed at the brass gate. There was someone standing on the other side. At first, I thought it was someone coming to help us. Through the decorative pattern of the brass gate, I could make out a dark silhouette, roughly human-shaped. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized something was horribly wrong. The figure was too tall, too thin. Its limbs were elongated, wrong. And it wasn't standing on the other side of the gate. It was standing in the shaft itself, impossibly, as if gravity didn't apply to it. "Help us," Margaret sobbed. "Please help us." The figure tilted its head at an unnatural angle. And then it spoke. in a voice like wind through a graveyard, "You shouldn't have come here." I grabbed Margaret and pulled her away from the gate, pressing us both against the back wall of the elevator. My flashlight was still on the floor by the gate, and in its beam, I could see the figure beginning to move. Long skeletal fingers reached through the decorative gaps in the brass gate, and where they touched the metal, frost spread outward in delicate, deadly patterns. "What do you want?" I shouted, more out of panic than any hope of reasoning with this thing. "This is our place," it said. "We died here, burned here, and now this place is ours forever." The fire, I thought. The fire in 1943. How many people had died in that fire? The newspapers had never given an exact count. The management had hushed it up, paid off families, buried the story as best they could. "We're sorry," I said, my voice shaking. "We didn't know. We'll leave. We'll never come back. Just please let us go." The fingers withdrew from the gate. For a moment I dared to hope, but then the entire elevator began to shake violently. The lights flickered back on, strobing irregularly, and in those flashes of illumination, I saw more figures in the shaft. Dozens of them, all burned and twisted, all reaching toward us with charred hands. Margaret was screaming, and I was screaming too, pressing ourselves so hard against the back wall that I felt the metal panels dig into my spine. The elevator dropped again, just a few feet this time, and the lights went out once more. In the darkness, I heard whispers, hundreds of overlapping voices, all saying the same thing. "Stay with us. Stay with us. Stay with us." I fumbled desperately for my flashlight, my hands encountering Margaret's as we both scrambled on the floor. My fingers finally closed around it, and I swung the beam toward the gate. The figures were gone. The shaft beyond the brass gate showed normal brick wall, normal elevator mechanics. Everything looked as it should, and then, with a gentle ping, the elevator lurched back into motion, rising smoothly upward. The lights came back on, steady and bright. The temperature returned to normal. We passed the second floor, then the third. The elevator stopped at the fourth floor, and the brass gate slid open smoothly, as if operated by invisible hands. We didn't hesitate. We scrambled out of that elevator and ran. We ran past confused shoppers, past displays of books and records, past salespeople calling after us to ask if we were all right. We didn't stop until we reached the main staircase, and then we practically flew down those stairs, not caring who we bumped into or what kind of scene we were making. The doorman looked startled when we burst through the main entrance, but we didn't stop to explain. We ran down the street in the freezing December air, ran until our lungs burned and our legs ached, ran until we were 6 blocks away from Riverside Plaza. Finally, gasping and exhausted, we collapsed onto a bench at a bus stop. Margaret was crying, and I realized I was too. We held each other, shaking, while confused passers-by gave us concerned looks. "What was that?" Margaret finally managed to say. "Dorothy, what was that?" "I don't know," I said. "But we're never going back there. Never." She nodded vigorously, wiping her eyes. "Never." We took the bus home instead of the streetcar, not wanting to go anywhere near Riverside Plaza. When we got back to our brownstone, we locked all the doors and windows, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. We sat together in the living room, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot tea and trying to process what had happened. "Maybe we imagined it," Margaret said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Maybe there was a gas leak in the elevator and we hallucinated. We both had the same hallucination, I asked. At the same time? She had no answer for that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those burned figures, kept hearing their whispered plea for us to stay with them. Around 2 in the morning, I finally gave up on sleep and went downstairs to our small library. I pulled out every old newspaper we had, searching for information about the Riverside Plaza fire. I found a small article from November 1943 tucked away on page 7 of the Tribune. "Fire at Riverside Plaza Claims Lives," the headline read. The article was brief, maddeningly vague. It mentioned a fire in the elevator shaft, said that several people had died, but didn't specify how many. The cause was listed as electrical malfunction. The article ended by noting that the building would be closed for renovations. That was it. No names of victims, no details about what exactly had happened. Just a few paragraphs, easily overlooked, easily forgotten, except by those who had died there. In the days that followed, I became obsessed with finding out more. I went to the library and searched through microfiche of old newspapers, looking for any mention of Riverside Plaza. I found a few more articles, each as vague as the first. It seemed the building's owners had worked very hard to keep the story quiet. But I did find one piece of information that chilled me to the bone. The fire had started in the old brass elevator, the same one Margaret and I had taken. 23 people had been trapped inside or in the shaft when it happened. None survived. Margaret begged me to stop researching, to let it go. "We escaped," she said. "We're safe. Why torture yourself?" But I couldn't let it go. Those people deserved to be remembered. They deserved more than a few vague paragraphs and a cover-up. I tried to tell people about what had happened to us. I called the newspaper and tried to speak to reporters. I went to the police. But no one believed me. They thought I was hysterical, grief-stricken, suffering from some kind of nervous breakdown. One officer actually suggested I see a psychiatrist. The only person who believed me was Father Murphy at our church. I told him everything, and he listened without judgment. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "There are places in this world," he finally said, "where tragedy leaves a mark, where the boundary between this world and the next grows thin. What you experienced was real, Dorothy. Those souls are trapped there, unable to move on." "Can anything be done for them?" I asked. He shook his head sadly. "They would need to choose to move on, to let go of this world, and many who die in tragedy cannot or will not. All we can do is pray for them and stay away from that place." I took his advice. I prayed for those 23 souls every night, and I never went near Riverside Plaza again. Margaret eventually married her doctor, a kind man named Richard, and they moved to Wisconsin. She rarely spoke of that day, and when I tried to bring it up, she would change the subject. I think she convinced herself over time that it had been a hallucination, a shared delusion brought on by stress and grief. But I knew better. Over the years, I heard stories from other people who had experienced strange things at Riverside Plaza. A woman who saw burned handprints on the wall of the ladies' room. A maintenance worker who heard screaming coming from the old elevator shaft late at night. A security guard who quit after seeing shadowy figures moving through the 4th floor when the store was closed. The stories were always quickly dismissed, explained away. Gas leaks overactive imaginations, tricks of light and shadow. The building's management was very good at providing rational explanations, but I knew the truth, and I carried it with me for the rest of my life. Riverside Plaza was eventually torn down in 1978. They built a modern shopping mall in its place, all glass and steel and artificial cheer. I watched the demolition on the news, and I found myself hoping that destroying the building would free those trapped souls, would finally let them rest. But I don't know if it did. Sometimes I wonder if they are still there, in some way, tied to that spot of ground where they died in terror and pain. I hope not. I hope Father Murphy was wrong, and that demolishing the building broke whatever held them there. I hope they found peace. I'm an old woman now, 98 years old, writing this in a nursing home with hands so arthritic I can barely hold the pen. Margaret passed away 5 years ago, and with her went the only other person who truly knew what we experienced that day. I'm writing this down because I need people to know the truth. I need those 23 people to be remembered, not as a footnote in a covered-up tragedy, but as real, people who suffered and died and deserved better. Their names were William Hendricks, Dorothy Marsh, no relation, Robert Tanaka, Susan O'Brien, James Crawford, Elena Rodriguez, Thomas Burke, Mary McAllister, Charles Washington, Florence Chen, Patrick O'Malley, Sarah Goldstein, Michael Rossi, Catherine Hughes, David Kowalski, Rebecca Johnson, Anthony DeLuca, Margaret Flynn, Joseph Nguyen, Elizabeth Hartman, Henry Braun, Alice Martinez, and Daniel Lawson. I found their names in the records of a lawsuit that was settled quietly, sealed by court order. It took me 15 years of searching, but I found them. They were real. They lived and they died horribly, and the world tried to forget them. I will not forget. If you're reading this, please don't forget them either. And if you ever find yourself in a building with an old brass elevator, with decorative gates and tarnished metal, walk away. Take the stairs. Trust your instincts. Because some places remember tragedy, and some places never let go. I learned that lesson on December 15th, 1945, and I've carried it with me every day since. That shopping trip to Riverside Plaza didn't just go horribly wrong. It showed me that there are doors in this world that should never be opened, and darkness that should never be disturbed. May those 23 souls finally find the peace they were denied in life. And may God have mercy on us all.